Thanks so much for inviting us. I don't know if you want to say anything, Vicky, before I jump right in.
Well, just to say hello to everybody who didn't get a chance to do that, and just to say my stress levels have seriously reduced, Jenny, since I saw your lovely face popping up on the screen there. So talk about learning new skills, all this online stuff during a global pandemic. So, but no, I'm happy for you to kick off, Jenny.
Awesome. Okay, that's super. So yeah, we use this model, this stress first aid model. And we used it because it has it's very informed by research. They describe it as evidence informed. And you'll see yourselves as we go through, it really kind of links in with the idea of stigma. It really links into the strengths that we have. And the emphasis on it is essentially noticing our own stress reactions and self-care, possibly self-care deficits, and also it gives us a little model for how to connect with other people around their stress levels and self-care. So one thing that we all know just from, I suppose, being humans is that it can be difficult to talk about things when we're struggling, that our stress reactions can actually sometimes work against us in terms of accessing support. And one thing we know as researchers is that peer-to-peer support is the most effective kind of intervention. That if you have somebody who's working beside you, who's offering support, it's much easier to access, it's much easier to utilize than it is with a kind of a top-down approach. So that's why we adopted this stress first aid model and brought it into the hospital here, and that's why we're offering it today. It comes from the Center for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder in the States. You'll see, I mean, if you've done any kind of work in this area, that it has kind of resonances with other pieces like CBT, like psychological first aid, whatever. So there's a lot of commonalities, and I think that is just more evidence that it really addresses suffering that's common to all of us. So Vicki and I are going to touch a little bit on, or we're going to, the bulk of the talk will be on that stress first aid. We're going to, we were hoping to do kind of a Q&A or at least an offering in the middle of the talk around, what's going on for people. But in the awareness that this is being recorded, we asked people instead, very kindly facilitated by Monica, to maybe type in or send in a few stressors that they have, and we'll be referencing those as we go along. There will be time at the end as well for Q&A when it's not being recorded. And also a little, maybe hopefully will be a little bit inspiring around your own self-care. Vicki and I have both been working in mindfulness-based approaches and self-compassion now, and it can be very difficult to turn our attention to things that feel optional. Self-care definitely feels optional, particularly when we're under pressure. And it can be very hard to turn toward that when we have so many other pressures on us, even though we know, working in the field that we work in, how important it is. So maybe it might give you hopefully a little bit of inspiration around that, around turning toward the things that actually support you. So there we go. That's that first slide. Thanks, Vicki.
Brilliant. So Jenny and I are going to just share the presentation back and forth. We're quite used to presenting together now, Jenny. So we hope we can bring our charm and fun also to an online presentation, Jenny. Not just so our experience around the hospital has been that we might just pop up with this presentation in all sorts of places. We've been to the back of the catering department. We've been into parts of the hospital we never thought we'd see. And I suppose from a personal point of view, it's been really, really useful to be able to support our peers. And as Jenny said, that's really what we want to do here with the stress first aid model. And just to say and to reiterate what Jenny said is that we realize that people's stressors are not just work stressors. There are also things that are going on for them. And certainly the feedback we got from yourselves, just a little bit that Monica was able to pass on to us, was that the stress is certainly work related, but also in other areas. So we really acknowledge, that you might be finding yourselves maybe coping slightly differently with all of the stressors. So we're hoping that this is useful to all of that. So the first kind of slide that I've popped up there is the double-edged sword of values and ideals. And as people who are drawn to the areas of work that we are, and I'm very aware that a lot of you are both researchers and clinicians. I know we have a good mix of people, but generally we're all people with a common interest in something here. This is the palliative care kind of research area. And so you may identify some of these ideals and values in yourselves. So if you have a look there at the three kind of pieces, we have the strengths on the left-hand side, the guiding ideals in the middle, and then what those ideals can leave us vulnerable to on the right-hand side. So starting there with the idea of selflessness, certainly an ideal we'd see a lot in healthcare. The strength of that is that we place others' welfare above our own welfare, and certainly our colleagues in healthcare settings and in the acute hospitals. I'm really thinking of our colleagues today when we are in a third wave of the pandemic, and this idea that they get up every day and they are exhausted and they go into work and they put themselves into that situation. The problem is, and the vulnerability that you'll see there related to selflessness, is that they may not seek help for their own difficulties or challenges, because their own selves and their own healthcare and mental health and physical health care is perhaps not made a priority. The second ideal there, loyalty, again, something you might really identify with or might resonate with you. That idea of commitment to serving others in healthcare settings, patients, but also to protect our colleagues. You know, we may, you know, do things that then leave us vulnerable. And in that case, we may feel vulnerable to guilt, and also a lot of complicated feelings about loss, whether that be loss of literal loss of people that we love, but also the losses of things that we know and love, the parts of our lives that we know and love, and the things we do and have done and can no longer do that we've lost, and loss of roles. The third piece there around stoicism, real toughing it out kind of a value and ideal. Again, I think of my colleagues that I see in the hospital every day, where they just, you know, put their heads down and get on with things. That toughness and ability to endure hardships and with no complaining, most of the time anyways, is certainly a strength that we see. But the problem again, and the vulnerability there, is maybe not acknowledging or not being aware of at times a significant symptom or suffering in ourselves or those closest to us. People who are drawn to healthcare and the kinds of research that yourselves are involved in probably have a very strong moral code. They have that internal compass that really guides them to choose the things that they personally see as right over those things that they personally see as wrong. However, unfortunately, that can leave us feeling very frustrated. And it may even feel like betrayal at times when somebody that I work with or somebody that I observe perhaps doesn't follow a moral code according to what my moral code is. This could be because of circumstances outside of all of our control, but it still can feel very, very difficult. You might look around and see somebody doing something and think, well, I wouldn't do it like that, or I wouldn't have made that choice. That wouldn't sit well with my own moral code. So that can feel very difficult. And then just being aware of everyone in the virtual room here today, to get to where you've been and where you are is a strive for excellence, that ideal that has guided you to get to where you are, to become that best and most effective professional person, researcher, clinician that you can be. The problem is then when we're in less than ideal situation, and let's be honest, we're in the middle of a global pandemic, we may feel ashamed, or we may feel like we failed in some way when we can't, because of, again, things outside of our control, when we're not able to keep up to that standard of excellence, or that personal standard of excellence that we're used to, because of all the things that are getting in the way.
Vicky, can you go back one? Because
I
think
can, of
I just have
course.
something to add there. I know
Perfect.
you're not surprised at that, Vicky.
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
It wouldn't be us presenting, Jenny, if we didn't add in.
Oh, you're very kind to make it both of us. Okay. So no, I was, when you were talking about that, Vicky, when you were talking particularly about the excellence piece, I was just
Yeah.
remembering the material that was sent in, around
Yes.
stressors. And
Yes.
around the challenges with actually getting research done during
Yes.
this pandemic.
Yes.
When, for us, it's a really high priority, but sometimes for the people that we're trying to get information from, our, research participants, it's not as high a priority.
Absolutely.
And it can feel, two themes came through for me. I don't know if you're the same, Vicki, but one was that sense of being stuck because of circumstances and actually having very little control over that stuckness because of circumstances. And then the other one was a sense of isolation, like a personal kind of isolation, as being separate from everybody physically, but also this kind of isolation with the work, that like other people aren't connecting with the work in the same way, that even when we were all together in offices, even you could get that little bit of support with a little bit of chat, a little bit of, oh, what do you think? And like email them again, or should I leave it? Or, all those kinds of things, but really feeling stuck and really feeling isolated in that sense of stuckness. And I think that really fits with this sense of, undermining our mental health around this value of excellence, because we're used to being able to get stuff done.
Absolutely.
And now we're in this space where really, we could be the best ever, and it doesn't mean that the priority of our work is going up in anybody else's mind. Does that make sense what I'm saying, Vicki?
Yeah, absolutely. And it feels like that excellence, or that kind of ideal, gets in the way of self-compassion then. We find ourselves finding it difficult to be compassionate to ourselves and give ourselves a bit of a break. Jenny always jokes saying, I'm doing my best to work in the middle of a global pandemic. And we laugh about it because we have to remind ourselves that, we might want to strive for excellence, but we have to be self-compassionate about that. No, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, that comes from my best friend. I was saying to her, I'm trying to work from home. She's like, you're not working from home. You're at home trying to work during a global pandemic. That's totally different than working from home.
Absolutely.
Like, oh, that's really like homeschooling. Like homeschooling is normally a considered choice, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm not homeschooling. I'm just trying to teach my kids while they're at home because of a global pandemic. Okay, I'm ready for the next slide. Thanks, Vicki.
Perfect.
Okay, so this is the stress continuum model. And I really like this model from Stress First Stage because it isn't binary. It's not like, oh, I'm really stressed. I've fallen off the cliff of stress, or I'm 100% okay. And it really acknowledges how, like, the movement of our experience. It's so funny looking at myself on Zoom because my hands are going like crazy, but they're like below the level of the camera. But anyway, okay. So if you think about our own stress experience, maybe there are times, maybe not at the moment, maybe a little bit over the summer. I don't know. I had a little bit of green over the summer, but times when we're feeling really good, really well rested, kind of optimally functioning, ready for more, like in a place of, welcoming learning, just really, because this model comes originally from a military background, they talk about this idea of being mission focused, just like totally focused on what needs to happen and ready to do it. That's that green zone. And we, sometimes have that, and also that sense of fun. Which I think is so important to acknowledge when that's not there, right? But anyway, so that's that green zone. But then as the pressure builds, or it might be a single thing that's going on, it might be multiple things going on, or it might be a time frame, that it's been going on for a while, we might move into what they call that kind of reacting zone, of reacting to the stress around us, but then recovering. So moving kind of easily between that yellow and green. And maybe, symptoms that might go along with that are like the things my husband would be very familiar with, like irritability or loss of motivation, that kind of, you're under pressure, but you're also in a place where you might be experiencing, you might be easily moved back into the mission ready state. So that's that yellow zone. As things, if we're still under pressure, or if the pressure is increasing, or if we don't have access to that green zone, the next level that they talk about is what's called a stress injury. Okay. So that's more significant, more persistent. They talk about that kind of leaving the potential for that to leave a scar, periods in our lives when we might look back and think, God, that was awful. That was so bad what I went through there. And they have some in the stress first aid model. I find it very helpful. They have some very specific causes that might push us into that stress injury zone, which I think we've got another slide on coming up. But you've got your the features around that, or the symptoms, I might say, are feeling less of a sense of control. So the way I would know if I was in, moving into orange rather than yellow is I stop feeling like myself. Yellow is like stressed out Jenny. If I move into a place where I'm like, what the hell's going on? Like, what am I doing here? Where that's more of that orange zone, when you're not feeling like yourself, when it feels like there's less control around it. And some of the symptoms around that too are that, and I think you touched on this in the first slide there, Vicki, was that kind of guilt and shame and blame. So you've got feeling guilty, and turn that inwards in terms of shame, but also turning it outwards in terms of blame. And so we get a lot of symptoms there, a lot of thinking around what's wrong with the world, what's wrong with other people, what's wrong with this very specific person that I'm thinking, whatever, that kind of rage, maybe internal rage and external rage. So that's that stress injury zone. And then further along, we move into that red zone. And really what we're talking about there is a stress illness. So that is something that is, clearly diagnosable, something like post-traumatic stress disorder, or significant depressive or anxiety disorder, or substance abuse disorder. And those are things that, we'd really suggest, if you're in that space, you need, help, you need some kind of professional assistance, if you're not peer-to-peer, maybe isn't appropriate for that zone. You might need additional supports in addition to the peer-to-peer supports. Whereas in the green, yellow, and orange, when they talk about it, like I said, it came from the military, it came specifically from the Navy. They talk about that in terms of being the shipmate behavior, that the person next to you might be able to support you in that space. Whereas in the red zone, we're really looking for additional supports as well as peer-to-peer. But what I like I said, what I like about this is it's movement. You're not 100% in one all the time. You're moving between these, and it gives you a chance to say, at any particular point, like, where am I? Am I like, is this stressed out Jenny, or is this Jenny that actually needs some help? Believe me, I know that, Jenny, right? But like raising your own awareness around, this is a continuum. And what can I do, if I am orange Jenny, if I'm in that space, what can I do to support myself to get closer to green? Like, I might not get to green, but what can I put in place? Like, what is that, coming back to that idea of self-care? What supports do I need? What brings me into that zone of being able to sleep better, interact better, function better, all of that stuff. I hope I've covered that. Vicki, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, no, I think again, Jenny, it just gives a shorthand to people as well. You said earlier about the stigma of mental health challenges, and at times, we are hesitant to talk about, how things are affecting us from a psychological, emotional point of view, and this, I think, just normalizes that a little bit, and it's okay to say, I am yellow Jenny today, or I'm orange Jenny, and I'm trying to move back to green Jenny, but it is difficult. But it's nice to think that we can keep moving back towards the green, and that we have a shorthand to speak to our colleagues as well, and just say, look, where are you? This is where I am, and just allows us to just normalize it a little bit in terms of our conversations about where we are in terms of our own stress.
Perfect. Wonderful.
Perfect. So I'll move on here. So just before I do, just under when we move into a stress injury, which is that orange bit there, Jenny spoke about there's some specific causes that we're going to look at in our next slide. So I'm just going to move on there. So when we're moving to the point where things are maybe a bit more sustained in terms of stressors, or I've just had one thing on top of the other, and we're starting to talk about a stress injury, these are just 4 categories where it's really, really interesting to kind of have a look at the kinds of things that can be the I suppose the etiology of those stress injuries. So, the first one here, and again, Jenny spoke about this coming from a military background, from the Navy. So I can understand in terms of that how life threat would be the one that they put on that side of the slide, but also, with the pandemic that we're facing, where people's lives are at risk. I mean, I know back in March last year, I remember being really hit by this absolute understanding that this really does threaten my life and the life of people that I love. So that life threat or a traumatic injury is due to the exposure of or exposure to intense injury, horrific or gruesome experiences, or death. So some of us come face to face in our daily clinical practice, where we are working in medical settings or other settings where yes, we may actually be exposed to this, but also just to acknowledge that there's been this idea of, this virus that is a life threat, that is something that we are all exposed to at the moment. The next category there is loss or a grief injury. So that's the loss of people, things, or parts of oneself. So I'm sure in the group here today, there are people who have lost loved ones, who have, and thinking about the people we know and the people we don't know who have lost their lives, whether that be to COVID or other reasons. But also there's been a loss of things and parts of oneself. And I said that a little bit earlier. There's a loss of roles. Jenny laughs about, homeschooling, but like, who knew, you were the teacher for your children this year, and losing that sense of yourself as somebody who actually has a couple of hours off in the morning when your children go to school, or, losing that idea of yourself as someone who's really competent and gets on with things and is able to cope with everything. Losing roles, people aren't able to complete research, there's a loss in that, loss in all the things we knew we could do. So yes, there's a loss of people, but also of things and parts of oneself. I have to say, I feel the intense loss of my social life, for example, and that's not me being kind of, twee about it. It really is a loss of something that is really important and really builds ourselves up. Then that other piece around inner conflict, where there is a moral injury. And again, that might be due to behaviors or the witnessing of behaviors that violate moral values, things that I hold dear that other people perhaps don't. I know that our colleagues, are making decisions every day in the ICU, for example, around, choices that no person should have to make, and how difficult it is when we all have these moral values and ideals, and having to witness choices being made and behaviors going on that are really, really difficult from our own moral values and standpoints, our own moral compass. So again, inner conflict and a moral injury. And then one that I think we've a slide later on that really talks to this piece, but I have to say from a personal point of view, I really can relate to this wear and tear. I feel we've got to a point, and in March last year, we were all ready for action, ready to kind of, fight and kind of do the things we needed to do, but we're all exhausted. And walking around the hospital recently, as you know, Jenny and I work in Beaumont, you can literally see it in people. They're absolutely fatigued. And fatigue is not just a physical feeling, it's a cognitive piece, and there's an emotional, psychological piece as well. And that's that accumulation of stress from all the sources. So that's you homeschooling your kids, that's you minding your elderly relatives, that's you trying to work online when you know it's not ideal, and having to do that without rest and recovery in between. Jenny spoke about being in the green zone. I felt in the green zone. I managed to take some time off and felt in the green zone for just a couple of days until again that fatigue hits you again, and you realize that perhaps you need more rest and recovery time. So I hope that makes sense, those causes of stress injury. So I'll just see if Jenny's, I'm sure, got something to add to that one there, Jenny.
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Vicki. Just around the moral injury, I mean, we think of those big ticket items, like ICU or whatever, but there's also choices that people are making where, like not caring for elderly relatives, you know what I mean? Where it's like, if I go in there, if I'm, we have, my in-laws are quite elderly, and it's like, I have to choose to stay away from them. Other people are, picking up whatever, but there's definitely a sense of, oh gosh, not being able to offer something that I would normally offer. And that has an impact on me as well, that I feel that. Or, a really great example that came from some of the work on the wards was, like, the nurses wanting to be able to just pop in and give patients cups of tea, like they would normally do, or, just some kind of like informal contact. And they couldn't do it because they would have to like gown up, do their whole PPE thing, go into that patient, then come out, strip off, put it all back on for some other patient. And so they had to regulate that informal contact and feeling the injury of that. So it doesn't have to be a big ticket item. It's just something that we feel like we should be doing that we're not doing, or something that we're doing that we feel like we shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
So that anytime, and we know this from other research, that anytime we're working outside of our own value stream, that puts us at risk for a stress injury, that cognitive dissonance. Oh, great. Okay. So this is the way that stress first aid starts to look at, sorry, I'm just moving the picture out of my way, that starts to look at elements of self-care and resilience. And it's also the way that they, like, for our personal resilience, but also for that peer-to-peer contact. So again, coming back to that idea that, the person next to us has a lot to offer us, and the person, when we're next to that person, we have a lot to offer, that it goes both ways. That, and another thing that we know, even though it feels so counterintuitive at times, is that helping other people helps us, that there's a huge feedback loop in terms of altruistic behavior. And again, there's a lot of nice people out there who that feels very intuitive to them. I'm not one of those people. When I'm exhausted and frustrated, like, the last thing I want to do is reach out to somebody else. And yet, if I do it, I feel that little bump, right? So we've got these kinds of things going on around this resilience. It's like around our own, these 7 C's, but also always thinking about how do we apply this to the people around us. So checking and coordinating. Check is the first of the 7 C's, and that's around tuning in, again, both ways, tuning into what we're experiencing, checking in, what's happening for me, how am I right now, what's my sleep like, what's my breathing like in this moment, all of that kind of checking in, but also tuning in and checking in with people around us. We're going to give you the Oscar model a little bit later on in this talk about a way to begin that conversation, because it can be difficult at times to do that. But checking in, just observing, and listening to the people around us, to ourselves, and also to the people around us. The second C there has to do with coordinate, and that's what they call it anyway, but it's essentially resource signposting, again, for ourselves and for other people. It's like what's actually out there. So, I was just doing this for another talk I'm doing, and I was looking up resources, and then like, it's amazing how much is out there. And I personally can feel so isolated, and yet there's a lot of stuff out there to support, me. And so tuning into like, who could I be talking to right now about this? What supports do I need? And how can I find them? Different people's stress reactions work differently. Some people, when they're feeling under pressure, they reach out for support. Me, when I'm feeling under pressure, I withdraw, which is, again, like not a great strategy when you're feeling under pressure, but that's what I do. And so it's like, if I can see that happening, what can I do to reach out for support? What's out there that can help me? So that's that coordinate. And then if I see somebody in need, what could I recommend to them? Now, those are the first two C's, okay, the check and coordinate. And then the last 5, those are the personal resilience factors. So that's something that we're either trying to support ourselves in or to support the person we're talking to in. And the first one there is cover. And cover refers to safety. Okay, so again, when we're in a highly pressurized situation, is there a way that we can feel a little bit more safe? Or is there a way that we can help our peer feel a little bit more safe in that moment? And that could be something like stepping, out for a moment. It could be something like, eye contact and breathing. It could be something like reassurance in that moment, reminding somebody of what they've been through already, what they've already achieved, reminding ourselves of that as well. So that's about generating some sense of safety or increasing the sense of safety that people feel. The second one is calm, okay? And that relates to the kind of, I was going to just say physical, but it's emotional and cognitive as well. But that kind of hyper arousal, it's like, what can we do to increase our own sense of calmness? I mean, you can see how closely related to cover and safety it is. But what can I do to just slow down this machine, or what can I offer to this hyped up machine next to me in terms of calming the physical, emotional, and cognitive system that's right there. And, one really great trick that I learned was, even like if I'm walking to something and I'm feeling really stressed, it's just to slow down my walk. I mean, often I'm late, right? Like even just this right now, so like sometimes I don't have that option. But if I have that option, even just slowing down, or when you're talking to somebody, even just slowing down the way that you're speaking can induce this sense of less hurry, which then, connects with their physiological arousal system and can help slow things down. Breathing techniques, relaxation techniques, sleep, all this kind of stuff that just slows down that hyper arousal. Number 5 there is connect. And I love your little highlighter there. Thanks, Vicki. That comes back to connecting with other people. So again, the research is out there. It's like the number one way to encourage resilience, to experience resilience, is social connectedness. And as I'm saying that, I'm thinking about all that isolation that was in, your notes around the stress that you're experiencing, of being away from, physically away from the supports that you have. And it's really, it's rotten, but it's good to even write down the word isolation, because it brings it to the forefront of our minds and say, that's actually what's happening right here, is I am isolated from my social contacts. And what could I be doing around that? Even though it's a pain and all that Zoom and all that nonsense, what could I be doing to increase my sense of social connectedness? Even looking at it as, like an audit, a social connection audit. Like, what have I got? What am I utilizing? And what could I be utilizing? And again, for the person standing next to us, what kinds of social contacts do they have? how can we increase those? How can we have a sense of that peer-to-peer, and even just that one, like there's like an imaginary person here, but like even that conversation around stress enhances our social connectedness. Number 6 there is competence. And that, I mean, we certainly saw that a lot when we were doing this in the hospital. And this kind of sense of people getting a hit around, and you kind of referenced this a little bit earlier too, Vicki, around their sense of competence and effectiveness. So we saw it a lot with redeployment, people having to learn brand new skills or use the skills that they have in a very different way. Or people just doing jobs that they wouldn't normally do. I think you were too, Vicki, helping out with staff counseling, not in terms of, I wasn't offering mental health support, but I was connecting with staff who had coronavirus, at home, and I was like, I had this whole worksheet I had to work through and everything. I had no idea what I was doing, none whatsoever, and I felt such a sense of responsibility, and feeling very responsible and not know what you're supposed to be doing. That's a real recipe for stress disaster, So even thinking about the things that, like homeschooling, like all this that you're doing now that you didn't used to have to do, or that you're having to use your skills in a different way, and that can set us up for those kinds of mental health challenges, or just feeling out of our depth. And so, what could we be doing to support our sense of competence? And again, reassurance is very important there. A lot of us have learned a lot of things over a lot of years. We'll learn this too. And even just kind of saying that to yourself, say that to the person standing next to you. And then the last one in the 7 C's is confidence. And that relates very specifically to the idea of hope and optimism in the future. And it's like, it's a little bit easier now, because we're thinking about vaccines, and we're thinking all this kind of stuff, than it was even 6 months ago talking about this. But it's still a challenge, it's like, okay, what is this future going to look like? How, what's this summer going to look like? How are we going to do this? How are we going to manage this? And to pause and say, okay, again, I've been through a lot. I will get through this next piece. Things will look different in 6 months, in the same way that things look very different than they did 6 months ago. And just connecting with that sense of hopefulness and optimism, or providing that sense of hope and hopefulness and optimism for that person standing next to us. That's a lot of talk, Vicki. You couldn't possibly have anything to offer on this slide. No, I'm just kidding. Do you have anything?
No, well, actually, I really like that last point you were making, and how difficult it is for people to maintain that hope at the moment, but it's so important, and all the other things then feed into us being able to just remain hopeful, Yep. And just to say that we've got more detail on each of these, so we're not going to go through each of these slides, but we have more there, so you guys can go through those, because there is a lot of chat in that one, but it's important to maybe take some time just to go through them later. So they are all there with some examples.
Pause. Can you just pause that one? Sorry, Vicki. I'm so sorry. Can you go back one?
I can. That one?
Okay. Yeah. Look,
there you go.
Right there. Recalibrate expectations and goals. Like that is so much to do with those comments that came through on the emails. You know what I mean? It was like, how am I supposed to get this work done on top of everything else when nobody cares about my research? And it's like, what is your expectation for yourself around this?
And your expectation of others. Absolutely.
Well, that too. Sorry, Vicki, keep going. Sorry.
No, not at all. So they are there, just a little bit more detail on each of those. But I suppose, I'm going to go through this slide and Jenny's going to go through the next one. So these are kind of Jenny and Vicki have been speaking for the last 45 minutes. Now, what are we actually going to do about it? So these kind of slides now give you a little bit of, stress first aid. Now, how do I actually translate that into something I can do? So as I say, I'll go through this slide and then Jenny will go through OSCAR, which is the next one. And this is a bit more of the how to do it. So 3 things. We want you to recognize when either you or one of your peers has a stress injury or is at risk of developing a stress injury. When somebody's not in the green or the yellow, is kind of more in the orange. As I said, I sort of camped in yellow, visited orange, and very rarely visited green in the last while. So really recognizing when either it's going on for me or for one of my peers. We're going to ask you to act on that, and we're going to ask you to know something to do about that. So Jenny and I going for a socially distanced walk around the beautiful Beaumont Hospital, and she's chatting away, and I realize that things are maybe she's not yellow Jenny or green Jenny, she's more orange Jenny, and I really noticed that around her, just the way she is. So I really do recognize that things are difficult for my colleague, or again for myself. Now, as tempting as it is just to say, oh, geez, I've enough going on myself, I'm not going to do anything about that. I'm just going to put my head down, go for the walk, and let Jenny off with herself. We're going to ask you really to act on that. So not just for your peers, but also if you see something that's going on, am I at risk for a stress injury? Is my peer at risk? So you're actually going to act if you see something, and you're actually going to say something. So either you're going to say to the person themselves, or perhaps, there's a network, a support network that that person is connected to, and you might say it to somebody in that support network, in support of your colleague. So we're seeing it, we're noticing it, we're actually saying something about it, either to the person's support network, or acknowledging it for ourselves. And then we're actually going to, and it talks to the last piece that Jenny spoke about, where we actually are going to have a couple of things up our sleeve what we can actually suggest for the person. So in one of our last slides today, we have a couple of things that we suggest, kind of just ideas, things to get you thinking about some self-care and peer support resources. And I really encourage you to sit down with a piece of paper after we finish today and actually start writing a few things down. Don't wait until, stress hits you or stress hits one of your loved ones. Have a couple of things up your sleeve that you can do. So we're recognizing it, we're acting on it, and we're actually going to know what we're going to do about it. Having one or two things up our sleeve that we might offer, either take it on board ourselves or offer it to a peer. Anything to add there, Jenny?
Nope.
Moving her on, Oscar.
Okay, so this is, it can be a little bit tricky to sometimes begin that conversation, that if you see something, say something conversation. And I'll give you an example. We were talking about this for, we probably, talked about this to, I don't know, 40 different teams, whatever. And then it happened and somebody did it to me, and it took me like ages to realize that that's what was going on. Right? But so the first piece is to observe. Okay, so that's just that noticing that Vicki already spoke about. The second piece of Oscar is to say what you saw, right? So it's to state the observation. It's really important that right there, you're only saying the thing you saw. You're not interpreting it. You're not like, I'll tell you my example in a second, but you're not making assumptions around it. You're just saying what it is. The third part is to clarify the role. So why are you saying that? Okay. And really the answer is because you care about the person. Okay. So you're not saying it because you're their boss. You're not saying it because you want them to, perform better, whatever. You're saying it because you care about that person, and stating that explicitly. The reason I'm mentioning this is because I care about you. All right. You can ask why, what's going on? Is there something going on? And then you can respond with those guided options, like what was going on there when Vicki was talking about having a couple of resources. Okay. So I'll give you the example of when it was done to me. Okay. So I had a colleague, I had been coming late to team meetings, department meetings. And I like department meetings. So I normally go to them, and I'd missed one, I was late, whatever. So this colleague said to me, Jenny, I noticed that you haven't been coming to the department meeting. So they had seen it. Okay. And then they just stated it. And that, you left early, so they just said that you didn't come and then you were leaving early, right? And that's not like you, which is true. Okay, so that was their observation. The only reason I'm mentioning it is just in case there's something going on. I was just a little bit worried about you, right? So clarify their role, okay? And then, is there something happening? I mean, apart from the global pandemic, okay? So, I was absolutely, even though I had talked about Oscar so many times, I was completely clueless that that's what was going on here. And I was like, well, actually, yeah. I mean, I'm too super annoyed about X, Y, and Z, right? And I won't go into the details here because it's being recorded. But like, and there was something very specific I was annoyed about. And we just kind of shared a little conversation about that. And that, in a sense, was the guided option there that person offered themselves as a sounding board. Okay. And it worked. And I felt better. Okay. Now, if that person had said something to me like, Jenny, I noticed that you weren't at the department meeting and you left a little bit early. Are you really annoyed about X, Y, and Z? Like if they had made the assumption about why, I'm not sure that conversation would have gone the same way. Okay. Because I would have reacted to that and been like, no, I'm fine. I would have reacted to their interpretation. So it's really important that if you're having a conversation like this, that you're just stating the observations. It's also really good for you because you know that that's something that actually happened. So you're not on as thin of ice as if you said, are you upset or are you angry or whatever? You just said, oh, I saw you left early. It's something going on. Just kind of a time that I used it was just at the end of November. I have a colleague who was, I'd met her a couple of times and I met her and she just wasn't herself. She's normally quite able to tolerate a lot of distress and she just didn't seem in that space. And so I said to her, hey, you seem kind of stressed out. I noticed, you're kind of talking more negatively about the organization, whatever. So it was like my observation, right? I'm just a little worried about you or whatever. And she was like, oh yeah, I'm really pissed off, whatever. And we had that conversation. But instead of saying, did you think about doing X? I said, well, you know what? I'm doing this self-compassion course. Like, it's probably going to suck, but I'm doing it anyway. Do you want to do it with me? And so I kind of reached out in that way. So it wasn't about directing her. It was about, something I'm doing and inviting her in. So it also hit that kind of social connectedness piece. And she ended up doing it. And, hopefully it was helpful for her. Right. So those are ways that you might think about having that conversation. Anything you want to add there, Vicki?
No, I just think that the combining those two slides, it's just really useful. And you're not there to interpret. You're not there to be a therapist. You're just there to say, I've seen it. I care about you. And, here's some ideas. Let's do them together or, whatever, but it's just a nice way into these conversations,
Yep.
So I'll move us on here to the last kind of official slide. I'm aware of the time. I can imagine Monica and Claude thinking these guys are talking so much, and we've no time for questions. So I'll fly through this. So we do have a little bit of time for questions, and I know Jenny would be open to this, and so would I. If anyone has any specific questions, feel free to have those passed on to us. That's no problem, just in case we do run out of time. So this slide I find really, really interesting, and it comes out of PTSD research by these guys at the bottom here. And what it says is that really and it's what Jenny and I are hoping you'll get from today, is that self-care and peer care and peer support strategies should be flexible. And the reason they should be is in a time of high emotional intensity. So I'm taking you back, Micheal Martin. Oh, actually, it was Leo at the time. Leo came out onto the lectern in March last year and told us there's this thing, it's coronavirus. And we were really in a very high emotional intensity at that stage. We're all very fearful and worried, and the adrenaline was pumping, and it was all very, very, very difficult. And what we wanted to do was lower our sense of distress at the time. And what we did was we all used as much distraction as we possibly could at that time. I use the same example every time, but I'm sure all of you, much like me, became obsessed with things on Netflix like The Tiger King. Yes. And if you didn't, you should definitely watch it. So this guy who had some tigers and lions in cages, and I mean, really, as far from a global pandemic as it possibly could be. And we all watched that, and we went for our walks, and we distracted ourselves from this, and we managed to lower that distress. However, we are now almost 1 year later. And while the emotional intensity has had to decrease, because sure, we couldn't stay that worried and that fearful and that, anxious for all of those months. We're now in a more emotionally, a less emotionally intense context, but we're still continuing on and it's still stressful. However, we can't just keep distracting ourselves. I can't watch any more Netflix. It's just not possible to keep myself distracted. And if I did, I'm more vulnerable to a stress injury. What I really need to do is think of more flexible approaches to my self-care and to my peer care with those around me. So I need to reappraise the strategies that I'm using and the strategies that I might be supporting other people in. And the research, these guys tell us that if we are able to be flexible with our self-care strategies, the chances of me developing a stress injury, something like post-traumatic stress disorder, is much lower. So that's why in our next slide, we're going to give you a couple of ideas, a couple of things just to kind of, give you a
Oh,
little bit of
Vicky, no,
inspiration.
can we just say one thing? I'm sorry.
Hold on. So
Sorry.
before I do that, go, Jenny.
No, I just want to say that this is something that we see all the time now in the media. It's like all the
Yes,
time. Like back in
yes.
March and April, it was like, we're all going to die, whatever. But now we see like, how was that? Like how, what have I learned?
Yeah.
People talk about like, all their kind of resilience factors. And sometimes it's annoying because it's like virtue signaling, but really that's what's going on is this like, kind of, it's more time with the family or more, like even like physios, they're like, I was able to do more exercise myself, this kind of sense of what was the meaning in it
Mm,
for me.
mm,
And
mm.
so if you find that happening, that's just such a very natural way of keeping the self-care flexible, that it isn't just distraction. It's also like starting to think about it, like what the heck happened and what meaning did that have for me? Sorry, Vicky.
No, not at all. No, so making sense of what has gone
Making
before
sense.
makes and that makes sense. So I really want you to hear us this morning, and you can tell we both love to chat, but really after we've finished talking, is really to think about what constitutes your own self-care. Write it down and put it somewhere. Be creative about it and just come up with a couple of ideas. 5 minutes. I've just put a couple of things down there on the slide. So Jenny has put a huge amount of work into this really amazing mindfulness and relaxation center on the Beaumont website, and there's some lovely relaxation and mindfulness exercises there. Please feel free to log on and have a look. Stress control is a great course over 6 weeks. It's presented often online, and often we have access to it through our networks for no cost. So look out for that. It's a really good resource. I'm doing the 100 days of walking. Me and the Minister for Health and Kira Kelly from the radio, we're all doing that. But it's a lovely thing to do where you connect with other people, even if it's virtual friends. And also there's loads of free online exercise things. Netflix has this really cool thing now. I don't know if anyone's seen it, Jenny. I don't know if you've seen it. The guy from Headspace has done these really cool cartoons about Headspace's guide to meditation. And there's 3 more to come, I believe, on different topics. Really nice. What about staff counseling, employee assistance program? What about your GP? I love this one. I Googled this. This is not mine. Swapping al desco for al fresco dining. Go and sit outside and have your sandwich. I know it's Baltic, but put on your hat and scarf and gloves and go and sit outside for a change. Don't just sit at your desk. On Pasta, very kindly sending us 2 more free postcards to send to
Oh,
people. Use them. Send them out to people. Write a letter. When last did you do that? As something I try to do, I only got married in November, so this will make sense to you, where we make our dinners an occasion. We light a candle, we have our little glass of Prosecco from our stash that is still there from the wedding, and make things an occasion. Don't just let it one day feel exactly like the other. What about looking at your creativity, painting, drawing and doodling, journaling, etc., etc.? So just a couple of ideas there for you.